I've been singing that song for a long time, and a lot of people kind of got it associated with me because I think it's a personal me. It is.
December 1972, Houston, Texas. Elvis Presley sits in front of a room full of reporters, and someone asks the question he's been dreading for months. "How's married life treating you, Elvis?" He smiles, that famous smile, the one that's disarmed millions of people over 2 decades. But if you watch the footage, and most people haven't because it's buried in some archive that nobody bothers to dig through anymore, if you actually watch his eyes, you'll see something else entirely. Fear, not the fear of a man caught off guard. The fear of a man who knows exactly what he wants to say and knows he absolutely cannot say it. So instead, he gives them the performance. Priscilla's wonderful. Lisa Marie's growing up so fast. I'm a lucky man. The words come out smooth, practiced, safe. He pivots to talking about his upcoming tour dates before anyone can ask a follow-up question. But here's what makes that moment devastating. Elvis Presley, the man who could command any stage in the world, who could make 70,000 people lose their minds with a single hip movement, who had more charisma in his pinky finger than most people have in their entire body. That man couldn't speak freely about his own marriage. Not because he didn't want to, because he wasn't allowed to. See, by December 1972, Elvis and Priscilla's marriage was already falling apart. They were separated in everything but name. She was living her own life in Los Angeles. He was trapped in Vegas, doing show after show, coming home to Graceland to find it emptier every time. And Priscilla, she was already building the narrative, already doing interviews where she positioned herself as the devoted wife of a complicated genius, the woman who sacrificed everything to stand by Elvis Presley, the mother holding the family together while her husband chose his career over his family. It was a perfect story, sympathetic, relatable. It painted her as the victim of Elvis's fame, his schedule, his inability to be present. There was just one problem. Elvis didn't recognize any of it. That's what ate at him. Not the divorce itself. Marriages end. He understood that. What destroyed him was watching someone rewrite their entire relationship in real time, turning herself into a character she'd never actually been, and knowing he couldn't do a damn thing to stop it. Because if Elvis pushed back, even a little, he knew exactly what would happen. First, he'd look like the villain, the big star attacking his wife, the man who couldn't handle a woman finally standing up for herself. In 1972, with women's liberation movements gaining momentum, with the culture shifting toward questioning male authority, Elvis knew he'd be crucified for speaking against Priscilla publicly. Second, there was Lisa Marie, his daughter, the one pure, uncomplicated thing in his life. If he went to war with Priscilla in the press, Lisa Marie would be caught in the middle. She was 4 years old. She didn't need to grow up watching her parents destroy each other in public. And third, this was the one that really had him trapped. There were contracts, agreements, legal language that basically said, keep your mouth shut about the marriage or risk losing access to your daughter. Priscilla's lawyers had been very, very careful about that. So Elvis smiled for the cameras, said married life was wonderful, praised Priscilla in interviews even as she was systematically dismantling their relationship behind the scenes. But the lies, the specific lies she was telling, those haunted him. She told people she grew up at Graceland, painting this picture of a sheltered girl who was molded by Elvis and his world. That she was this innocent thing he'd taken under his wing. She told people he'd neglected her for his career, that Vegas had consumed him, that she'd begged him to stay home and he'd chosen fame instead. She told people she'd finally found the courage to leave, to discover who she was outside of being Mrs. Elvis Presley, the brave woman walking away from an icon to find herself. And Elvis, stuck in that Houston press conference, stuck in 100 other interviews just like it, had to swallow every word, had to nod along, had to protect the image, protect his daughter, protect his career. The only people who heard his real feelings were the guys closest to him, the Memphis Mafia, the band members who'd been with him for years, his father Vernon, who watched his son crumbling under the weight of a story he couldn't correct. And one night, one specific night that the people who were there still talk about, Elvis finally let it all out. It wasn't planned. It wasn't meant to be recorded or remembered or shared. But someone had left a tape recorder running, the way they often did around Elvis, just to capture moments for posterity. And what got captured that night was Elvis Presley, stripped of every defense, every careful word, every protective layer he'd built around the truth of his marriage. What got captured was a man who'd been systematically silenced, finally speaking. And what he said about Priscilla, about her lies, her manipulation, her calculated rewriting of their entire relationship, it explained everything. Every strange decision she made, every calculated interview, every piece of the narrative she'd been constructing while Elvis was forced to smile and play along. That recording exists. The people who heard it know what Elvis really thought, what he really knew, what he couldn't say in public but desperately needed someone to hear. And it changes everything about how we understand their story. Elvis wasn't angry about all of it. That's the thing people don't understand. He could accept that the marriage failed. He could accept his own role in that failure. He'd been absent, he'd been difficult, he'd been consumed by a career that demanded everything from him. What he couldn't accept, what kept him awake at night, what made him need those pills just to quiet his mind, were the 3 specific lies Priscilla told. Lies that didn't just rewrite their marriage, lies that rewrote him. Let's start with the big one, the foundational lie that everything else was built on. I grew up at Graceland. Priscilla has told this story 1,000 times. Sweet 14-year-old girl in Germany, swept off her feet by the world's biggest star. He brings her to Memphis, to Graceland, where she's sheltered and protected and molded into the perfect wife. She's the innocent. He's the influential older man. She had no agency, no choice, no understanding of what she was getting into. It's a compelling narrative. It makes her sympathetic. It makes their age gap, which was always going to be the uncomfortable part of their story, seem less like something she pursued and more like something that happened to her. Except Elvis told a completely different version to the people he trusted. According to him, Priscilla wasn't some passive girl who got swept up in his world. She was strategic. Her stepfather, an Air Force officer stationed in Germany, knew exactly who Elvis Presley was, knew exactly what access to Elvis could mean for his stepdaughter's future. Elvis said Priscilla pursued him relentlessly in Germany, that she positioned herself to be around him constantly, that when he was trying to be careful, because even then he understood how their age difference looked, she made it impossible for him to keep distance. And when he came back to the States, her parents didn't resist bringing her to Graceland. They facilitated it. They pushed for it, because having their daughter connected to Elvis Presley was the opportunity of a lifetime. Elvis knew how this looked. He knew he'd be blamed for it, so he tried to do everything right. Got her parents' permission, made sure she finished school, eventually married her to make it legitimate. But in his private moments, he'd say, "She knew exactly what she was doing. I was the prize and she won." That's not the story Priscilla tells. In her version, she's the innocent victim of circumstance. And Elvis, trapped by his own guilt about their age gap, couldn't contradict her without sounding like a predator trying to blame a child. So that lie became truth, and Elvis became the man who'd corrupted a young girl, when in his mind, he'd been carefully manipulated by people who understood his weaknesses. The second lie was more personal, more cutting. Elvis neglected me for his career. This one shows up in every interview Priscilla's ever done. Elvis chose Vegas over family. He chose touring over being present. He chose fame over his wife and daughter. She was lonely, abandoned, desperate for attention that Elvis refused to give. And sure, Elvis was gone a lot. That's not in dispute. He had contracts, obligations. The Colonel had him locked into residencies and tour that kept him away from home for months at a time. But here's what Elvis told his band, his bodyguards, anyone who'd listen. He begged Priscilla to come with him. He wanted her in Vegas. He arranged suites at the hotels. He invited her to shows. He asked her to be part of his world, to travel with him, to bring Lisa Marie so they could be a family even while he was working. She said no every time. She preferred Lowe's Angels, preferred her own friends, her own social circle, her own life that didn't include watching Elvis perform the same songs night after night in smoke-filled casinos. And Elvis, who was already drowning in guilt about being an absent father, about failing as a husband, he internalized that rejection. He thought maybe he was asking too much. Maybe he was being selfish, expecting her to give up her life to follow him around. Until he found out why she was so determined to stay in LA. The karate instructor, Mike Stone, The affair that Priscilla later admitted to, but only after the divorce, only after Elvis was safely dead and couldn't contradict her timeline. Priscilla's story is that she met Mike Stone after her marriage to Elvis had already emotionally ended. That she was a neglected wife who finally found someone who paid attention to her. Elvis's story, the one he told in private, the one that made him physically sick to talk about, was that she'd been involved with Stone for over a year before she asked for a divorce. That she'd been planning her exit, arranging her finances, consulting lawyers, all while still living at Graceland. All while still playing the role of Mrs. Elvis Presley in public. He felt ambushed, betrayed, used. But when Priscilla told her version publicly, she was the wronged wife who'd finally found the courage to leave. And Elvis was the neglectful husband who'd driven her away. He couldn't fight that narrative without looking even worse. Without admitting he'd been cheated on, which would make him look weak. Without discussing the affair in detail, which would hurt Lisa Marie. So he stayed silent, and Priscilla's lie became the accepted truth. The third lie was the one that killed him. I left to find myself. Priscilla's empowerment story. The narrative of a woman discovering her identity outside of a famous man's shadow. She was brave. She was strong. She was finally becoming her own person. Elvis's version. She'd already found herself. Found herself a new relationship. Found herself financial security through divorce. Found herself a way to keep the Presley name and all its benefits while leaving behind the actual man. She didn't leave to discover who she was. She left because she'd gotten everything she needed from being Elvis Presley's wife, and now it was time to cash out. That's what Elvis believed. That's what he told people in his darkest moments, that he'd been insurance, that Graceland had been the goal, that she'd played the long game perfectly, and he'd been too trusting, too generous, too desperate to believe someone actually loved him for who he was. 3 lies, 3 versions of events that made Priscilla the sympathetic figure and Elvis the villain of his own marriage. And he couldn't correct any of it without destroying himself in the process. June 1973, 3 in the morning. Graceland is quiet except for the den where Elvis is still awake, talking to Red West and Sonny West, 2 of his oldest friends, part of that inner circle people called the Memphis Mafia. They're not having a formal conversation. It's just Elvis, exhausted and medicated and unable to sleep, talking the way you do at 3 a.m. when your defenses are completely down. When you're too tired to perform anymore. When you just need someone to hear you. And someone, probably Jerry Schilling, maybe Charlie Hodge, has left a tape recorder running. They did that sometimes around Elvis, not maliciously, just because everything Elvis did felt historically significant. Every conversation, every moment, every rambling late-night session might be worth preserving. Nobody thought this particular recording would matter. Nobody thought it would reveal anything that would recontextualize Elvis's entire final years. But it did. Because that night, Elvis finally talked about Priscilla without the filters, without the careful language, without protecting her image or his own. Red mentioned something about a recent interview Priscilla did, some magazine piece where she talked about her journey of self-discovery after leaving Elvis. How she's finding her own voice, building her own identity. And Elvis just loses it. Not screaming, not throwing things. That's not how Elvis operated when he was really hurt. He got quiet, reflective, devastatingly honest. She's rewriting history, he says. His voice is tired, defeated. And I can't stop it. I can't say a damn word, and she knows it. Sonny asks what he means. Asks if he's talking about the divorce settlement, the custody arrangements, all the legal reasons Elvis can't speak publicly about Priscilla. It's not just the legal stuff, Elvis says. It's everything. It's that she's making herself into this victim. This innocent woman who was trapped by the big bad Elvis Presley. And everybody believes it because why wouldn't they? I'm the star. I'm the one with all the power. Of course I'm the villain. There's a long pause on the recording. You can hear someone pouring a drink, someone lighting a cigarette. Then Elvis continues, and this is where it gets devastating. My daughter's gonna grow up thinking I abandoned them, that I cared more about Vegas, about performing, about anything except being her father. Priscilla's already planting those seeds. Every interview she does, every time she talks about how lonely she was, how absent I was, Lisa Marie's gonna hear that. She's gonna believe that, and I can't correct it without looking like I'm attacking her mother. Red tries to reassure him. tells him Lisa Marie will understand when she's older, that the truth always comes out eventually. Elvis laughs, it's bitter hollow. The truth is I begged Scylla to come to Vegas. Begged her to be part of my life. She didn't want that life. She wanted the name. She wanted Graceland. She wanted to say she was married to Elvis Presley, but she didn't want me. This is the moment where everything shifts, where Elvis stops defending himself and starts revealing what he actually believes happened. I'm the villain now, he says. The selfish star, the drug addict who drove away his perfect wife. That's the story everybody's gonna remember. Not that she was planning her exit for over a year. Not that she had lawyers setting up financial protection before she ever mentioned divorce. Not that she already had someone else. Just that Elvis Presley couldn't keep his marriage together because he loved fame more than his family. Sonny asks if he's talking about Mike Stone, about the affair. Of course I'm talking about Stone, Elvis says. I knew, for months I knew, and I couldn't say anything because what would that make me? The jealous husband. The controlling star who can't handle his wife having her own life. I was trapped. She had me completely trapped. Then comes the line that changes everything. The sentence that makes Elvis's entire final years make terrible, tragic sense. She knew exactly what she was doing from day one. I was insurance. Graceland was the goal. Becoming a Presley was the goal. And once she had that, once she could keep the name, keep the access, keep the money, she didn't need the actual man anymore. Red pushes back on this, tells Elvis he's being too harsh, that Priscilla did love him once, that the marriage was real even if it ended. Maybe, Elvis says, maybe at the beginning, but by the end I was just an obstacle, something she had to manage carefully so she could get what she wanted without looking like the bad guy. There's more conversation. They talk about other things, Lisa Marie's upcoming visit, some business with the Colonel, an upcoming tour. But Elvis keeps coming back to the same theme. At one point he says, "You know what kills me? I still can't hate her. I still look at her and remember the girl I married, the one I thought loved me, and maybe she did. Maybe I'm wrong about all of it. Maybe I'm just bitter and looking for someone to blame besides myself." But then, right before the recording cuts off, Elvis says something that sounds like his final word on the subject. I made her a Presley. I gave her everything. The name, the life, the security, and she's using it to bury me. She's gonna control how people remember this marriage. She's gonna control how people remember me, and I can't do a damn thing about it. Silence, then the click of the tape recorder being turned off. That conversation stayed private for years. The people who heard it didn't talk about it publicly. They protected Elvis's privacy even after he was gone. But it existed. It exists. And it proves that Elvis knew exactly what was happening. He understood the narrative being built around him. He saw how Priscilla was positioning herself for a future where she'd be the keeper of his legacy. And he was completely, utterly powerless to stop it. So why didn't Elvis just tell his side? Why didn't he do his own interviews, hire better lawyers, fight back against the narrative Priscilla was building? Because he couldn't, not legally, not professionally, not emotionally. And the systems that trapped him, the contracts, the image maintenance, his own psychology, they were so perfectly aligned that speaking his truth would have cost him everything. Start with the legal cage. The divorce settlement Elvis signed in 1973 included language that basically amounted to, shut up or lose access to your daughter. Not in those exact words, obviously. Lawyers are more elegant than that. But buried in the custody arrangements, the financial agreements, the division of assets, there were clauses about public conduct, about maintaining respect for each other publicly, about not disparaging the other parent. Priscilla's lawyers had been smart. They'd built in consequences for Elvis speaking negatively about her. He could lose custody time with Lisa Marie. He could trigger financial penalties. He could open himself up to accusations of parental alienation. And Priscilla's team was better prepared than his. She'd been planning this divorce for over a year, consulting attorneys, protecting assets, building her case. Elvis had been blindsided. By the time he realized what was happening, she'd already locked down terms that favored her completely. So legally, Elvis was silenced. Any public criticism of Priscilla could be used against him in custody proceedings. And Lisa Marie was the one thing, the only thing, he wouldn't risk. But it wasn't just the law, it was the image. Elvis Presley's entire brand was built on being a gentleman, the polite Southern boy who said yes ma'am and no sir. The devoted son who bought his mama a pink Cadillac. the clean-cut soldier who served his country, the family man who married his sweetheart. That image had been carefully constructed over 2 decades. It was worth millions. It was protected by RCA records, by the Colonel, by every business interest that depended on Elvis remaining America's wholesome rebel. And speaking negatively about his ex-wife, attacking the mother of his child, that would shatter the image instantly. He'd go from beloved icon to bitter celebrity in one interview, from sympathetic figure to vindictive star, using his platform to punish a woman for leaving him. The Colonel made this very clear. RCA made this very clear. Every advisor Elvis had told him the same thing: stay quiet, stay dignified, let it blow over. Your career depends on maintaining the image. So professionally, Elvis was trapped. His entire livelihood depended on him not defending himself. But the deepest trap wasn't legal or professional, it was emotional. Because Elvis still loved Priscilla, not in the way he had when they first married. That was gone, maybe had been gone for years. But he loved the memory of her. He loved the idea of what they'd been. He loved the girl he'd married, even if he didn't recognize the woman she'd become. And Elvis hated conflict, always had. He'd rather absorb pain than create it. He'd rather be taken advantage of than hurt someone, even someone who'd hurt him first. His generosity was legendary. He gave away cars, houses, jewelry to people who barely knew him. But that generosity came from a place of deep insecurity, a need to be loved, a fear that if he stopped giving, if he stopped being nice, people would leave. So even when he knew Priscilla was lying about him, even when he saw her building a narrative that made him the villain, he couldn't bring himself to destroy her publicly. Because that would mean accepting he'd been wrong about her from the beginning, that he'd wasted years on someone who'd used him, that his judgment had been that catastrophically bad. It was easier to stay silent, easier to swallow the pills that numbed the humiliation, easier to do another Vegas show than confront the fact that the woman he'd trusted most had betrayed him in the most calculated way possible. And here's the final, crushing irony. When Elvis died in August 1977, Priscilla became the executor of his estate. She became the official guardian of his legacy, the primary voice telling his story. The woman he privately accused of rewriting their history got to write the definitive version. She controlled Graceland. She controlled his image. She controlled how the world remembered Elvis Presley. She turned his death into her empire, built a business on his name, made herself into the keeper of Elvis's truth, while the actual truth, his truth, died with him. Elvis couldn't speak his truth when he was alive. And when he died, the woman he'd accused of lying became the only person the world would listen to. Priscilla didn't just survive Elvis. She turned his legacy into a multi-million-dollar empire that she controls to this day. Next time, we're exposing exactly how she built her fortune on Elvis's grave, who's really profiting from the king's name, and why his own family has been fighting her for decades. Subscribe now, because this gets so much darker.